What we obviously will be doing is going over last minute revision tips, as well as, I suppose, predictions style.
A little bit of predictions. The idea is to give you a sense of calm and peace and preparedness.
Yes, and also just last minute tips in terms of things like managing your time during the exam on Monday morning, structuring your essay, and of course any final quotes maybe.
We might remember some quotes.
We may remember some quotes. So guys, welcome. So we're going to first begin by talking about the Literature Paper 1 structure. So in terms of how Literature Paper 1 is structured, you have your Shakespeare text, and then you have your 19th century text. For those of you guys who are doing AQA, obviously I know for EdExcel guys, you guys are going to be having your Shakespeare and in spectacles. But of course today, because the majority of students are going to be sitting the AQA exams, we're going to look at the structure for Macbeth specifically, which is what most students are sitting, as well as Christmas Carol. So, Mr. Salles, firstly, top tips in terms of how to manage timings for the entire paper, how should students kind of pace themselves, and also, I guess, what between now and Monday should students do when it comes to just making sure that they're ready for exams?
Right. So first thing, don't change anything that you haven't already tried. So if you're getting success, don't change it. If you're not getting success, take some advice that's different. So we've started off by recommending 52 minutes for each question, because obviously they're worth the same marks. I would encourage you to start strongly, and on AQA, Shakespeare comes first. That doesn't mean you have to answer it first. So I'd answer the one that you prefer, the one that you know most about first.
Okay.
So you build a sense of confidence. However, the danger in any exam is that you don't stick to your time limit. And the way exams work, because the English exam goes from 9 down to 1, the easy marks are at the beginning of the question.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no point spending an extra 5 or 10 minutes on one question because you're just trying to get the top marks, because the marks are so much easier to get on the next. And so I'd be really, really strict about your time limits, and don't rob from one question to go to the other.
Okay. The only slightly different approach I would take in terms of approaching the question paper, and I was doing this and I was telling my students this this past week when we've been going over Literature Paper 1 and 2, is I actually suggest starting with the harder question first.
Okay.
Getting that out of the way, because going over a really challenging question, number one, will take a lot of energy, and you have the most energy at the beginning of the exam. So you want to actually, my suggestion would be start with a harder question first. You have the most energy to tackle it at the start of the exam, and also because it's harder, you're naturally going to find that you're not going to overrun, right? You're not going to look at a question and be like, oh my gosh, it's so exciting, I have so much to say, blah, 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 and then you find that you've literally then got 30 minutes for the second half, right? So you're probably also going to find that you're going to be a bit more strict with yourself, because you kind of want to get that out of the way to then go to the second question. And then when you go to the second question, that's the easier question, then you can get straight into it. So that's the only slight approach I would change in terms of approaching it.
Well, that's really cool, because that's why I'm saying, when you're reflecting on what you do already, don't change something that's already working. But if it's not working for you, then we've got 2 different suggestions here. Pick the one that you want to try.
Okay, so let's get into it with Macbeth, which is what majority of students do tend to have as a set play.
Yeah.
So guys, what we're going to do is we're going to go over Macbeth to begin with, going over what we think are the characters and also the themes that are going to come up, as well as how you can approach them with quotations and so on. And then also what we'll talk about is how to structure your Macbeth essay when you obviously tackle this part of your Literature Paper 1 exams.
Yeah.
So Mr. Salles, firstly, obviously we've talked about spending maximum 52 minutes on the Macbeth question. How should students, when they get the extract and of course the question that goes with it, approach it?
So the annotation is crucial, one for what it gives you and the other for what it takes away.
Okay.
So let me talk about what it gives you first. You've got the keywords in the question. Put a box around them. This will force you to use those words in your answer. If you don't, you won't get the top grades, because you won't be writing an argument, it won't be conceptualized. You'll have detailed paragraphs that don't always answer the actual question. I see that all the time. So box around the keywords. Then you want to think, how many quotes can I easily get from the extract?
Okay.
So there's no rule. You can just have one, or you could have 2 or 3. If you have more than that, that's easy to spot, go for it. But I tend to go for 3.
Okay. From the extract?
From the extract.
Okay.
3 at the most. And I'll tell you why in a sec. So lots of teachers encourage you to underline the quotes you want to talk about and then write like what you'd want to say. And my advice is that is wasted time. When you've underlined a quote, there is 0 chance that you will forget what you wanted to say about it. You're in the exam. You will remember what you wanted to say, and you only get marks for what you write. So once you've underlined the quotes, I'm then going to say which order you're going to deal with them. 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And once you know the order, you're good to go. However, the top grades need an argument, right? And if you write all about the extract and then go to the rest of the text, it's really, really difficult to write an argument. So you can get comfortably up to grade 7, writing about all the extract first and then going to the rest of the text. But if you want the really top grades, you have to write about a quote in the extract and then ask yourself, well, what was this character or this theme like at the beginning?
Okay.
I'll write about a quote there to show the journey to the extract, and then I'll look at the same thing at the end and show the journey towards the end. This is the character arc or the arc of the theme, and once you start thinking about that journey, you're automatically conceptualized, and so you're aiming for grades 8 and 9.
Okay.
So that's how I would tackle it. You could just jot down the quote from before and the quote after, but I think that takes too much time. I would write straight away about the quote in the extract, and then, okay, what quote does that remind me of? As soon as I think of it, I'll write about it then. If I can't think of it, I'll go to the end, and I'll write about one at the end. So it doesn't matter if you can't do the full arc for each quote.
Okay. Well, I'll probably take a slightly different approach again.
Excellent.
And obviously, guys, the reason why we're having this live is so that you guys can also get 2 different teacher perspectives, right?
Exactly.
So I actually would take the approach of starting with the extract, thinking about taking maximum 2 to 3 quotes from the extract, and then the second half of your essay being elsewhere in the play. In other words, being a bit more structured in approaching it means that it's clearer in your mind what you're going to be talking about, but also it makes it really easy for your examiner to follow your points as you're making them. I do think that's quite valid, also starting and contrasting the quotations. What I've sometimes found is when students take that approach, they start kind of getting themselves confused and muddled up rather than focusing what's happening in the extract. And I would suggest when you're thinking about the extract, get your context in your AO3 out of the way, connect some of the points from the extract to context, and then in your elsewhere points, you can then just literally focus on just your memorized quotations, thinking about themes, and then developing your essay in that way. So that would be my approach and how it would differ.
So I find that is a very easy approach to do, and it can get you all the way to grade 7, no bother. And then after that, it kind of depends on how good you are.
Okay, how much detail and analysis you go into. And of course, going into more detail, especially if you're aiming for a 7, 8, or 9. And again, if you've obviously joined in my literature classes, I always go into lots of detail, and I always suggest go into detail, especially if you're aiming for the higher grades. So shall we get into character questions?
Let's do some
characters.
Guys,
I'm always really paranoid about having any technical issues, so I'm going to quickly check just to see if the chat is okay, and if there's no technical problems. And of course, guys, what I'll then do is, so it seems like everything is okay. So, right, so let's get straight into it now with the actual exam question. So of course, guys, remember that when it comes to Macbeth, and to be honest, also Christmas Carol, in whichever text you're sitting, you will either get a character-based question or a theme-based question. Now, in terms of characters, students don't have very much time left between now and Monday. Which characters should students be really, really clear on? Quotes all sorted out for Macbeth.
So we're going for these 3, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. I mean, it's a pattern every year that they choose one or the other. And then I'm going with a prediction of the witches, which is basically looking at Lady Macbeth and Macbeth and then how the witches influence them. So those are the 3 characters that I would bother revising. And, 3 or 4 quotes for each would be plenty. If you know more, obviously you're going to use more, but if you don't, then just pick the high value 3 or 4 for each.
Yeah.
How would you do it?
Yes, I would definitely agree. I personally think, guys, you're going to get a Lady Macbeth question this year. And as Mr. Salles said, selecting at least 3 to 5 quotations per character. So let's say if students get a Macbeth question,
Yeah.
which key quotes should they go for?
So should we do one each? A top
Yes,
quote
I would
each?
say a top quote. Okay, so
Okay. So my first top quote is Macbeth at the beginning.
okay,
Why do we find out that he unseams the enemy from the knave to the chops? And I love this one because it shows his brutality, it shows his skill as a warrior, but it shows how much he likes to get up close and personal when he's killing, because you can't do that with a sword. You have to get up close with a dagger, and he then shakes hands with him after he's done it and bids him farewell. It's a kind of sick joke, really, a gory, sick joke that Shakespeare starts the play with to show that Macbeth loves violence, loves killing, and then you get to discuss whether he is a truly noble character, because he's doing this in service of the king,
okay.
or whether that's just a convenient alibi because he's actually a bloodthirsty psychopath.
Okay, the second quotation I'd suggest from Macbeth, also taken from early on, is when the witches plant the seeds of ambition in his mind. By the way, guys, if you're writing about either Macbeth or you get an ambition question, to be honest, if you even get any other theme question, you still always will find a way to talk about ambition, because that is the theme that underpins the play.
Yeah.
Therefore, when you're talking about ambition, use this phrasing that the witches plant the seeds of ambition in Macbeth's mind. And the perfect quotation that demonstrates this is after he's heard the prophecies and he says, "Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires." Especially the reference to stars, hide your fires. It is showing that Macbeth is experiencing this internal conflict. He has this growing sense of ambition. He wants to be powerful. He wants to be king, but also feels a real deep sense of loyalty towards King Duncan. So I think that would be a great Macbeth quote.
Yeah.
How about later?
Well, does this mean we're going to jump and skip the vaulting ambition one?
Absolutely not.
No, okay, so we'll go with vaulting ambition. So there's a conventional interpretation, which probably 85% of English teachers teach, that this is his hamartia, he's too ambitious, and his ambition is going to lead to this fall, and this is a kind of premonition of what's going to happen to him, but he doesn't listen to that warning and goes and decides to kill Duncan anyway. There's divine punishment. He gets his just deserts. However, when I look at the metaphor, he's talking about only having ambition as a spur, and he's saying that's not enough. With this spur of ambition, I'm going to vault and then fail. So for me, there's an extra layer on top. I need more than ambition if this is going to work, and for me, that's where Lady Macbeth comes in. That's why he writes to her about the witch's prophecies just before he arrives, because he wants her to have time to think about it. He knows she's the planner. He knows she's going to come up with a plan to become queen, my dearest partner in greatness, to make him king. He doesn't want to kill Duncan because he knows it's wrong. He wants to do it so that his ambition will be realised. Lady Macbeth is the key. So I don't see Lady Macbeth as using her power in isolation to manipulate him. I think Macbeth knows that she's going to manipulate him, and so he uses that to get that extra spur.
Okay, now the next quotation should be to do with his first supernatural hallucination, which demonstrates his guilt. This is obviously when he sees the floating dagger and he says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" Now this quotation is great if you get a Macbeth question, but also, we're going to talk about themes shortly, but if you also get a supernatural question, to be honest, also an ambition question, because it's showing the consequences of ambition, how he experiences this internal guilt, this internal sense of conflict, and it starts to corrupt his character. So of course, we can see that this floating dagger, which foreshadows his eventual murder of the king, we can see here that he also feels intense guilt because he's about to commit an act of regicide and go against divine right of kings. So I think that would be a great Macbeth quote.
I agree, but we boxed ourselves into a corner because we've used 4.
Oh yes, of
and
course
we've
we
only
have.
got one left.
Okay.
Well, shall we cheat and do some more?
Yes. Okay. Or we can suggest maybe out of the 4 quotations so far, maybe students can pick 2 from those.
Okay, that's cool. That leaves us anher 3 to play with.
Yes. Okay.
Love
so
it.
now we've got to kind of start shifting towards the middle and the end.
Yeah. So I'm going to pick it's still quite at the beginning. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm going to pick Banquo's ghost. And Macbeth says, "Never shake thy gory locks at me, thou canst not say I did it." Now the reason I'm going to pick that is this is the moment in the play where the Thanes turn against Macbeth. So up until that point, Macbeth's got away with it. If he had just killed Duncan, he would actually have got away with this murder. Historically, a little bit of AO3 for you, Banquo and Macbeth killed Duncan, and Macbeth stayed as king for ages. That's the history, right? Shakespeare changes this because obviously he wants to show that killing a king is the most awful thing to do in the world. He's writing this to prevent assassination attempts on King James. And therefore the turning point is a delicious irony where all the nobles, they know that Duncan's been killed. They don't know that Banquo's been killed. So from their perspective, when he says, "Never shake thy gory locks at me," they all see that as a confession that he has killed Duncan, and that's the moment they turn away from him. And so his tragedy is that he kills his friend. That is what ironically leads to his destruction, and the reason for that, Banquo is the ancestor of King James. And so Shakespeare presents killing Banquo as even worse than killing Duncan. Now, your teachers won't teach you that, so you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but if you do, that's why.
Okay, so now we've got 2 more quotes.
Yeah, we do.
The second to last quote from Macbeth, this is now towards the end of the play in Act 4, Scene 1, is when he meets the witches, and we can see here a complete contrast in his character, his persona, his demeanour, when he's now talking to them in a really commanding way. He actually is so corrupted by ambition, he thinks that he can actually command the witches and change his fate, and he calls them secret black and midnight hags. Now, what this quotation is showing is the consequences and the dangers of ambition. In other words, we can see that Macbeth, he has basically become this fallen hero. He's gone from being this great noble general, and he's gone from being somebody who actually is quite moved by the idea of killing the king, listening to the witches, to now actually becoming very much corrupted and believing that he can control his fate and the outcome of his fate. And of course, remember that Shakespeare was staging this before King James's court. He was obviously trying to send a message to the noblemen there who were seeing King James as a foreign king, that actually, if you were to overthrow him, if you were to change him, you'd become a tyrant and a fallen hero like this man here, Macbeth. So I think that would be a really great quotation, not only showing how Macbeth has become quite corrupted by his ambition, but also, again, it ties really nicely, because a lot of these quotations are going over, by the way, also slot really nicely with these main themes, okay? So I would say that would be a great Macbeth quote.
Right, so I'm going to cheat now because it's the last one. I'm going to take the soliloquy, the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech.
Okay.
Because there are so many quotes you can take from there. You've got his nihilism, his sense that life is pointless, has no meaning, life is a tale told by an idiot. I love that because he's not saying I've been an idiot, he's saying the person who's written my script for me to perform as a player, that person is an idiot. And he's not saying it's him, he's turning towards God and basically saying, look, you've decided on my fate. He is refusing to take responsibility for what he's done. And so that, for me, that is his ultimate transgression, is that he doesn't take responsibility for his own actions. And then, of course, you've got the great debate of, she should have died hereafter. Does that prove that he's dismissing Lady Macbeth, her death is inconsequential, or does it prove that he's actually fixated on it and he loves her and he wants time to grieve, but he can't because he's in battle? You get to decide. So that whole soliloquy is super rich.
Okay, so let's move on to the second character, who I think is going to come up.
Yeah.
Lady Macbeth's character, right? So when it comes to Lady Macbeth, of course, obviously remember that she and Macbeth almost travel in the opposite direction. She starts off being very ambitious and then becomes remorseful at the end. Macbeth, of course, starts off being very loyal to the king and then becomes extremely ambitious towards the end. Now, definitely, the first quotation I would say, even if it's a little bit cliche and everyone always remembers it, is taken from the Unsex Me Hair section, right? So definitely when she says, "Come ye spirits, unsex me hair," this quotation is great for any Lady Macbeth essay because it's showing how corrupted she is by ambition, okay? If you wanted to maybe change that, still showing how corrupted she is by ambition, but also to the extent that she controls her husband, you can maybe substitute that, hopefully it's not a quote you wanted to use, with looking like the innocent flower but being the serpent under it. So both these quotations demonstrate how Lady Macbeth is not only corrupted by ambition, but also is willing to do anything to gain power.
Shall we try a change of tactics here?
Okay.
And then do the final quote for Lady Macbeth.
Okay.
And then we'll know what to fill in.
Okay, yes.
So, it's obviously going to be the sleepwalking scene.
Of course.
I'm going to cheat again and treat that as one quote.
Okay.
So, obviously, the outdam spot, she is now seeing blood on her hands, which is the exact mirror image of Macbeth looking at the blood on his hands at the beginning when he's killed Duncan. So she has taken on his personality.
Mm-hmm.
He is now untroubled. He hasn't got a conscience. He's sleeping just fine.
Mm-hmm.
The other interesting thing about this is they're not sleeping together.
Mm-hmm.
Macbeth doesn't know what she says when she sleepwalks, which is why he's invited the doctor in. So there's a complete separation in the marriage.
Yep.
But Macbeth he's preparing for battle. This is the most important moment in his life, and yet he's spending time trying to help his wife. Mm-hmm. So I love that, because on the one hand, they're leading separate lives, but on the other, he still deeply cares for her. I think he's still in love with her at the end, and he desperately wants to cure her, and he can't. And the reason he can't isn't just her guilt. Her guilt comes from what he's done, not what she's done. So when she's listening to the 1, 2, why then 'tis time to do it, she's given the signal, but Macbeth has then gone and killed Duncan. And then she starts talking about Macduff. He had a wife. She's thinking about the murders that Macbeth has committed that he didn't need to commit.
Okay.
They needed to kill Duncan for ambition. All the other murders, they weren't necessary for ambition. That was Macbeth going too far. And for me, that is what drives her guilt.
Okay.
She's unleashed this killer.
Okay.
Hasn't been able to control him.
Okay. So then I would say then maybe contrasting that with now earlier quotations.
Yes.
Perhaps you can now shift into when she tries to control Macbeth and
Yeah.
tries to now change his nature.
Go for
And
it.
I think for sure a quotation from earlier which can nicely contrast this is when Lady Macbeth, we can see here earlier in the play, she dominates her relationship with Macbeth. She's like a ventriloquist, using his masculinity in order to make him kill the king when he initially refuses. So of course, earlier on in the play, she says, when you durst do it, then you're a man. In other words, she's not going to see him as a man unless he kills the king. But then she also repeats this during the banquet when Macbeth is seeing the ghost of Banquo and she asks him, are you a man, right? Now, these two quotations are really powerful, firstly, in demonstrating and establishing Lady Macbeth's dominance in her relationship with Macbeth. It also interestingly shows that their relationship has completely subverted gender roles in Jacobean society, where we can see that Lady Macbeth is quite controlling. She uses his masculinity against him to manipulate him. But also what's interesting is how Macbeth then listens to her.
Yeah.
Whilst a lot of Jacobean men would not listen to their wives, much less even tell them about their schemes. For example, Macduff is a really great example of somebody who doesn't tell his wife anything,
Yeah.
disappears off to England,
Yeah.
and then literally his wife is killed, right? So I think a great quotation to contrast the change in Lady Macbeth's persona is how earlier on this repeated reference to him being a man. So either going for, when you durst do it, then you're a man, or when she asks him as he's freaking out looking at Banquo's ghost, are you a man? So I think that would be a really nice contrast.
We've got one left, haven't we?
Yes.
So I'm going to pick, and I've got to be careful because YouTube gets sensitive here. So hopefully you'll know the quote I'm talking about. It's when she says what she would have done to her baby.
Okay.
If she'd broken a promise, what she'd rather do to the baby. Now, this is very, very brutal and violent, and I think it gets to the psychological reason for why Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are so easy to corrupt.
Okay.
And I think it's because they're grief-stricken. So remember, she wanted to be unsexed and have her milk taken for gall. She's got milk. She's obviously recently had a baby, and the baby is dead. We know that because Macduff says he hath no children at the end. We know Macbeth's got no children. So this baby hasn't survived, and they're both grief-stricken. And for me, even more than the taunts about his masculinity, it's that reference to the baby that really convinces him he owes his wife. He's got to go through with this for her.
Mm-hmm.
and it's out of grief. That's how I interpret that scene.
Okay. So now the third character we
Yes.
think may come up, and this is actually closely tied to your prediction.
It is.
It is the witches.
The witches. So, how much time have we got? Because we're going to.
Or how much time do we have?
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes for Macbeth.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. So, with the witches, the central idea you've got to come to terms with here is how far do they control him? So we'll probably give two opposite views here, which would be great because you can debate them and decide which one you like. So from my perspective, they have only one supernatural gift, and that is the ability to foresee the future.
Okay.
They never instruct Macbeth to do anything. They're not in any way responsible for what he does. It's entirely his choice. They just say, this is what's going to happen in the future. You're going to become Thane of Cawdor, you're going to become king, Banquo's sons are going to become king. That's just the way the future's going to be. It's Macbeth's evil that leads him immediately to talk about stars hide your fires. Macbeth immediately starts thinking about murder. But if he had just waited, the witches are saying, well, you're going to become king anyway, you don't have to do anything. And so he could have become king entirely legitimately. And there's no evidence that Fleance would have had to kill Macbeth in order to become king. So the whole trajectory of Macbeth's life could have been completely different if he didn't turn to evil straight away. And the witches don't make Macbeth evil, they just reveal it and allow him to express it.
Okay. Well, I disagree.
It'll be different, exactly.
I would say, as I've mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about the Macbeth quotation, the witches are portrayed as agents of chaos as they plant the seeds of ambition in Macbeth's mind. Even in Act 1, Scene 1, they are plotting. They're waiting until peace comes back to Scotland when the hurly-burly's done, so that they can cause chaos some more. And then they decide, actually, we're going to pick this individual as our vehicle to cause this chaos. So I personally believe that the witches actually deliberately planted the seeds of ambition in Macbeth's mind because they want to use him to cause more chaos in Scotland. And specifically, I think, especially for example, the Hail Macbeth scene, but even before in Act 1, Scene 1, when they say fair is foul and foul is fair, and then Banquo echoes his words, and even Macbeth, right, he says so foul and fair a day I've not seen. I would suggest that this demonstrates and it foreshadows the witches deliberately implanting the ideas of ambition in Macbeth's mind and corrupting him so that he can cause chaos for the sake of chaos, because they're just devilish creatures. They just like to see chaos. They like to see a well-run country just being destroyed for the sake of it. So I would definitely differ. I would say a good essay on the witches or the supernatural must absolutely talk about, in my opinion, how the witches plant the seeds of ambition in Macbeth's mind and deliberately corrupt him.
Yeah, so I'm 90% with you. They definitely want to cause this chaos, but they know he is the agent who's going to do it. They don't have to do anything to him at all. I don't think they plant anything. I think it's already innate in him, and they just reveal it.
So even if he'd never met the witches, you still think he'd somehow have disrupted, or did he still need some type of agent to unleash that?
He needed the permission, if you like. But it's an interesting question, isn't it? What tips him over the edge is when Duncan says, I'm going to make Malcolm king, rather than Macbeth. Because that would have been logical. He should have appointed Macbeth as the next king. And had that happened, Macbeth might have been, I can just wait. Anyway, we'll never know.
So in terms of quotations then, what would you say are the big quotes?
From the witches?
Yes.
Well, I guess we've already talked about the three prophecies at the beginning.
Correct.
You might start with the very opening where they already know they're going to meet with Macbeth, because that backs up your argument entirely, doesn't it? That they know they're picking on him because he's the one they can manipulate with ambition. And I would also pick the apparitions at the end, because they actually try not to tell him stuff. They say, seek to know no more. Like, that for me is amazing. They're like, if they're totally out to manipulate him, why do they say, "Oh, we've damaged you enough, mate. We don't need to tell you anymore."
Okay.
And Macbeth just can't resist. He wants to know more because that's going to allow him to carry on killing. That's why he slaughters Macduff's family. He wants to know more to justify these evil actions that he wants to carry out. And I think he also wants to know more because by this stage, he knows it's all up. He knows there's no way he's going to survive because all the Thanes are turning away from him and the English are invading. And the witches, ironically, try to let him off the hook. Look, don't ask us anymore. Like, we've told you enough. But because he's so evil, he can't resist.
Okay. So in terms of if I were to go for a witch's question, the quotes I would select is definitely from the beginning. Fair is foul and foul is fair. How they're going to reverse the natural order. Hail Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter. I would say, personally, when they see him and they say, by the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes,
100%
which demonstrates how they've corrupted his character, but also perhaps one of the prophecies, right? So, for instance, no man born of woman shall harm Macbeth. I think that quotation is great in showing how they are manipulative and they speak to him in half-truths and riddles.
Yeah.
Because they tell him, no one born of woman can harm you, but they fail to mention that being born of woman means that they're born naturally. However, if they're born via C-section, they can harm you. And this obviously leads Macbeth to act on this half-truth, not realizing that Macduff can actually kill him. Again, I think that this shows that the witches deliberately put ideas in his mind so that he acts on half of the information, and this leads to his downfall.
I completely agree.
Okay. So, given that we've now talked about the characters we think will come up, and obviously a lot of the quotations we've covered actually fit in the themes nicely.
Perfectly.
If, say, students were to get a theme question, right? What do you think could come up? And of course, we're going to need to wrap this up in about 5 minutes to then move on to talk about Christmas Carol.
Well, we've itemised them here for you. Ambition in some form comes up every year, really.
Yes.
If it's a character question, it's basically about ambition. And similarly, the supernatural.
All the points we've made about the witches, I think, would fit really nicely with supernatural.
We both think that fate and free will is a bit tough, and AQA will chicken away from it.
Yeah, I actually wasn't going to put fate and free will up because I think it's perhaps maybe a higher ability, challenging question.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So that's what we got. Ambition, supernatural.
Yeah, ambition, supernatural, possibly fate and free will, but highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, before we move on from Macbeth, okay, so guys, I will be checking the chat towards the end, taking a few questions, and then rushing off because Mr. Salles does have a play that he's going to be watching.
Yeah.
So we're on a bit of a time limit. However, before we move on from Macbeth, let's quickly talk about essay structure.
Yeah.
And once more, I think we may differ in our approaches in terms of how to structure the perfect Macbeth essay.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I'm going to begin by my approach to essay structures. Again, obviously, some of you guys are coming fresh from my literature week. The last class was yesterday when we went over unseen poetry. On Monday, I'd gone over Macbeth. And for those of you that are familiar with my essay structures in terms of writing model answers, I always suggest when it comes to Macbeth, and to be honest, any literature text that you're getting, keep it simple, make it super easy for your examiner to follow your trail of thought, for your examiner to also see you have approached the extract, talked about what's happening in the beginning versus the end, select nice quotations, 2 maximum 3 quotes from the extract. So how you structure your response is, start off with a thesis statement in your introduction, talk about what message Shakespeare is trying to impart in connection to the question. Then your first 2 paragraphs, you want to talk about what's happening at the beginning of your extract. Make sure you mention context so that you don't forget. Then your following paragraph is talking about what's happening either in the middle or the end of the extract. Also get in a context or theme point. Then your following 2 paragraphs is talking about what's happening elsewhere in the play with your memorized quotations.
I'm okay with that structure.
Okay, you're not mad at it?
No, because the examiners literally don't care.
Okay.
So it's basically what structure works for you that's going to help you get the context in and show the journey from beginning to end.
Yes.
And as long as you're doing that, the examiners couldn't really care less.
Yeah.
I still think that if you can jump from the extract to what's happened earlier and then what's happened at the end, that's what's going to get you the mark. And you don't have to do that a quote at a time. You can write about the full extract and then go to the beginning and then the end and show how that thing's changed.
Yeah.
It's the arc that I want in the structure rather than the order of paragraphs.
Yeah, and actually before we move on to Christmas Carol, you've mentioned something really important about examiners, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of students tend to wonder is, if I write this, is there one specific paragraph structure examiners are looking for? Are examiners looking for this, examiners looking for that, right? And that's a question I always tend to get from a lot of students. Now, one thing I want to mention, and this is something that I'm actually quite passionate about when it comes to students doing well, is to remember the examiner psychology. Number one, remember that your poor examiners are going to be spending all of this summer marking. Make it really easy for your examiner to be able to follow your trail of thought. Yeah. That's why I always suggest have a structured approach where you're almost able to hold your examiner's hand and show them, okay, this is what I'm talking about, and here's my AO3. Then they make it really easy to tick this off and then say, right, I can see that they've talked about AO3, I can see that they're talking about the extract. Paragraph 2, hey, Mr. Examiner, Mrs. Examiner, I'm talking about something else from the extract. I've given you 2 diverse quotations from the start and the end, right? So they then read this and then say, tick, I can see that they've talked about different points from the extract. Then in your 3rd and 4th paragraph talking about elsewhere, making sure that your quotations are taken from different parts of the play, beginning versus the end or the middle, obviously opposite to what's happening in the extract. Once more, what this does is it makes your examiner's life very easy as they're reading through your answer, as they are following your trail of thought, but most importantly, you're literally able to hold their hand and give them no reason to award you top marks, because they're literally saying, okay, when it comes to context, I can see they've talked about context. Have they talked about the extract enough? Yes, because I can see different quotations. Have they mentioned and given a really good argument talking about elsewhere? I can see that. So that's my suggestion. I think it's very important. Students almost sometimes approach exams from a very egocentric perspective, where they're only thinking about themselves, and they forget that there's a human being at the end of their script who's going to be spending the summertime reading their work. I always suggest make your examiner's life super easy when it comes to how you write. Also write clearly, but also how you structure your essay, so that it's super easy for them to have all the reasons to give you the marks that you want.
That's true. I tend to think to myself less charitably, under pressure, examiners are stupid. Don't make them think. They want to make a decision like that.
Okay.
Right? And then the easier you can make that decision, the easier it is. So,
and that's examiner psychology, guys. Please don't forget that. Again, I always go over this with my students. Don't forget that your examiner is also a human being. Lots of students maybe think like it's a robot at the end, marking their scripts and not caring about things like handwriting, not caring about how they've laid out, or even thinking that the examiners are going to do the hard work of trying to interpret what you're saying. They're not. Exactly. They have zero patience. They're having to spend their summer whilst you're frolicking around and having fun. They're having to stay indoors marking your work. So make their life easy. Do not forget your examiner psychology.
100%, definitely.
Right, so let's talk about Christmas Carol. So when it comes to Christmas Carol, obviously guys, we're talking about Christmas Carol because obviously this is going to be the second half of your exams, right? Which is 19th century text. Of course, I know some of you guys are going to be doing other texts, so this is for those of you guys that are doing Christmas Carol. So when it comes to Christmas Carol, timing is going to still be the same, right?
Exactly.
And the approach for annotating,
yes,
all of that is still going to be exactly the same.
Exactly. Essay structure, the same.
The same. So in terms of characters, these are the characters we think are going to come up in your Christmas Carol exams. Either Scrooge, I think highly likely Scrooge.
Yeah.
Or the main ghost. Ghost of Christmas past, present, or future. So let's say students get a Scrooge question.
Yes.
Right? What quotes can they take from the beginning versus the end?
Give me a beginning one.
Beginning one obviously would be, if you want to go easy, Solitude is an oyster, showing how misanthropic and isolated he is. Misanthropic means that he isn't liked and he doesn't like other people. I think also from the start, are there no are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? So either Solitary is an oyster, or when he asks the rhetorical questions to the charity men who are asking him for charity to help the poor, he responds by saying, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? One of these quotations works really well in showing Scrooge as a very isolated figure, as somebody who is a representation and a symbol of many Victorian businessmen who were portrayed as very greedy by Dickens. And also, how he's presented at the beginning is he's shown as very despised and very separate from the rest of society. So I think that either of these quotations would be amazing for Scrooge's character. And let's say you get a Scrooge question related to, for example, the theme of poverty, the theme of redemption. These also fit really nicely.
Yeah, I would go straight in with that symbol of asking, you know, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? And that links immediately into what if they'd rather die.
Okay.
Then it should decrease the surplus population, because this presents him as a kind of arch villain, caricature, but Dickens' game is quite subtle here, because actually what he's saying is, no, this is Malthusian economics, this is why we have the workhouse, this is why we have prisons, and actually society behaves exactly like Scrooge. And so when he's attacking Scrooge, he's actually attacking the reader. He's saying, this is the society that you guys support. You have the same view of the poor as Scrooge does, and that's why I think that exchange at the beginning is so crucial. And it immediately gets you writing about Dickens' ideas, which puts you in the top grades from the get-go.
Okay, great. I think the other quotation that comes to mind is actually not what Scrooge says, but it still shows his greed and the cost of his greed, especially because it isolates him and costs him his future family. I think a great quotation, it isn't said by Scrooge but by Belle, is when she says, "Another idol has displaced me, a golden one."
Yeah.
What this is interesting in demonstrating is, number one, how Scrooge is deeply isolated and his greed comes at the cost of a future family, so he becomes spiritually poor as a result of having no family. But also Dickens, remember that Dickens was writing for a very religious Victorian audience who believed in the idea of heaven and hell, but also in the idea of sin and good. And what Dickens was also trying to convey in this quotation is the love of money and underpaying workers is actually not only terrible for society, but also immoral, and it could lead to God's punishment in the afterlife. Brilliant. So I think that would be a great quotation. Yeah. It's not said by Scrooge. Remember, guys, by the way, when you're asked to write about characters, you don't always have to say the character quote themselves. You can also use other character quotations if you're able to connect it to what this demonstrates about the character, and also when you tie it to things like context.
Yeah. And one of the things that we didn't talk about with Macbeth, but is super important, is if you're doing a character question, the examiners want you to treat the character as a construct.
Okay.
In other words, the character is a vehicle or a pawn in a game that the author is using to illustrate their ideas and points of view. So you can't just write about Scrooge and Belle as just characters. In a novel, to get the top marks, you've got to think, well, why has Dickens put them there? So why has he got Belle telling us this about Scrooge? It shows us that she is there to replace what he's ended up with. And if you remember, the Ghost of Christmas Past wants to keep showing Scrooge the past, and in particular, what he's missed out with Belle, and he begs the ghost not to do that. I don't want to look at this anymore, and he actually pushes down the hat over the candle flame of the ghost to try and expunge him, because the idea of not being a father is too much for him. And this then gives us that character arc at the end when he becomes a second father to Tiny Tim. Okay. So a major theme for me in the novel is about fatherhood, and Scrooge learns to be a father to the poor at the end, and that's Dickens' final message.
Okay. So. All right, so we've already said a quote from Stave 1.
Yeah.
In fact, it was 2 quotes from Stave 1, quote from Stave 2.
Yeah.
How about now towards the middle/end of...
we've got to have Stave 3, haven't we?
Okay, and Stave 3?
So I'm going to cheat, I'm going to give you 2.
Okay.
So because the first one is tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
Okay.
Right, because that links to my fatherhood idea, which we see with the redemption at the end when Tiny Tim is saved. So for me, if you think of 5 staves, the pivot is Stave 3, and it's Stave 3 where Scrooge begins to transform. Okay. And the moment is when he realises that Tiny Tim is going to die, and he knows that's his fault because he's the one who pays the wages of Bob Cratchit. So he knows he can do something about that, and he knows because the ghost tells him that this is part of the surplus population that he was willing to kill off before. Now he isn't, because he's thinking as a father. So I have to have that. And then the examiners desperately want you to write about context, but not paragraphs about it. And in the actual examiner's reports, I was reading them this morning, they comment on ignorance and want. Every essay should have ignorance and want in them, because it links directly to Dickens' ideas.
Okay, yep. I
So-
think ignorance and want is a very, very good one. So this is the children who protrude from the spirits.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay,
Yeah.
so the next quotation, definitely from Stave 4, when Scrooge says, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen." And what this is demonstrating is how the ghosts have been used by Dickens to transform Scrooge. Equally, remember that this novel was written for a very religious reader. And what Dickens was doing, especially by showing the Ghost of Christmas yet to come, almost as this frightening Grim Reaper, we can see here that in many ways it seems like Scrooge's future is set. And we can also see that Marley's ghost, his fate, is now coming to full circle for Scrooge. I think that's a really great quotation if you're writing about a Scrooge character question, where we can see that he not only is showing the consequences of his greed, which will lead to this hellish afterlife, and Dickens was doing this in order to make his Victorian readers change because they're really scared that they're going to go to hell, but also, of course, here we can see Scrooge's transformation and his redemption, I would argue.
So I'm going to choose a different one from Stave 4.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you something that you might not have considered. The examiners will give you the marks for a reference to the text. You don't have to get the exact words. And so I'm going to give you the reference. And the reference is all these employees who've stolen from him. So you've got the char lady, you've got the laundress, and you've got the undertaker's man. And they've all stolen something from Scrooge's corpse. And they go to a guy called Old Joe, who's about 70, to try and sell what they've stolen to him. And his house is a complete hovel. He hasn't even got proper furniture. He writes on the wall because everything's falling down. And this is Dickens' idea. This is a criminal who is still having to work as a criminal when he's 70 years old because he's still poor. And the other people who have stolen from him are all employed, but their wages are so low, they have to steal. And so this, for me, is his fundamental argument that Dickens is putting forward about paying fair wages, which is why when we get to Stave 5, he puts up Bob's salary. It's not just to save Tiny Tim, it's a message to the reader that we are paying people who work for us far too little, and we are causing poverty, whereas actually it would cost us very little to prevent poverty. We just have to pay a bit more.
Okay, and then finally from Stave 5, obviously
Yeah.
any Scrooge essay can't not have
Yeah.
a Stave 5 quotation. So of course when he says I will live in the past, present and future, we can see his redemption arc, right? How he's portrayed as a very redemptive figure. Remember that even if this novel was quite gothic and quite scary, Dickens didn't actually want to end with a negative message. What he was trying to show his readers is if their change was quite genuine, right? If they became more generous. If they took on his suggestion of treating the poor better, paying the workers better, they would actually be redeemed by God and given another chance, not only by God, but also by society, because we can see once Scrooge actually decides to live in the past, present and future and raise Bob's salary, he also is embraced by society, right? Whilst at the beginning, he was also quite isolated and excluded by society that really despised him. So I think that would be a really, really good one, which shows obviously the redemption arc.
Yeah, and I've already mentioned him becoming a second father to Tiny Tim.
Tiny Tim.
That's the point of the redemption for me.
Okay, how about if students can get a direct Scrooge question? By the way, guys, it's going to be like impossible if you write any Christmas Carol essay without talking about Scrooge.
Yeah.
But let's say they get one of the ghosts, right? So let's begin by the Ghost of Christmas Past, right? Let's say it's an extract-based question.
Yeah.
And they get a Ghost of Christmas Past.
Yeah. Well, they won't get an essay that's only on the Ghost of Christmas Past. It'll be on the ghost generally.
Yeah.
And so really, you've got to think, you've got these three main ghosts.
Yes.
What is the importance of us discovering Scrooge's past? So that's the point of the ghost. And it gives us the psychological reasons for Scrooge becoming a miser.
Yes.
So he's abandoned as a child, his father seems to hate him, He loves his sister, who then dies and abandons him. He's got no mother. Even when he's at school, the boys abandon him. He's got hardly any friends. And so we've got a deep psychological reason for his loneliness. And then the ghost shows him when he was lifted out of that by Fezziwig. And so Fezziwig became a model employer who spread happiness everywhere. And Scrooge has forgotten that role model. He could have become a Fezziwig himself, but he chose not to. And on the one hand, then we've been given the psychological reasons for why he's a miser, but also a critical view of he had the lesson of how to be completely different, but he rejected it. He needs to be taught a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the role of Christmas Past for me.
Okay, and with Christmas Present, for sure, especially based on what you've mentioned, right?
Yeah.
The quotation, this boy's ignorance, this girl's want, right? The Ghost of Christmas Past, his role is quite vital, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So now, do you want to talk about the present or not?
Ghost of Christmas Present,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I'm talking about. Ghost of Christmas Present.
Yeah, for me, the Ghost of Christmas Present, well, we've already talked about it. This is the family that you lost,
Yes.
Belle and her daughter. You could have had that daughter. And then the other one is, this is what the Cratchits are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he's treated them so cruelly, Bob Cratchit refuses to blame Scrooge. He actually proposes a toast to him, the founder of the feast. But it's that key moment when he sees Tiny Tim and what's going to happen. That changes everything. His whole universe changes then.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the important for me of the importance of the Ghost of Christmas Present.
Yes.
Although actually Dickens does cheat, because he asks the Ghost of Christmas Present what's going to happen in the future to Tiny Tim. And so that tells us Dickens is breaking his own rules here, and therefore this must be super important for him to break the rules. And that tells us the fate of Tiny Tim is the most important moment in the novel.
Okay, the most important moment in the novel.
Then to lead to his transformation.
Obviously,
the transformation is the most, yes.
Changing point, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I think the ignorance and want quotation is really good,
Yeah.
because that one ties into also the 1834 New Poor Laws. It also shows children being the biggest victims of poverty, the future's being stolen. And also it portrays actually to a lot of Victorian businessmen, we can see here how not only immoral they are, but also how they indirectly cause the deaths of all of these children as a result of their greed, right? So I think ignorance and want is great because it not only cuts to the heart of Dickens's message, where he's trying to convey that actually it's really the duty of very wealthy industrialist people like Scrooge to change. Otherwise, not only are they impacting the poor workers, but also the generations, the future generations of these poor workers. But of course, also we can see these children who are portrayed as sympathetic victims of this greed, right? So I think ignorance and want is also a great one for Ghost of Christmas Present. In fact, I think Ghost of Christmas Present is basically like he's using all of these young figures, right? Tiny Tim, the kids, ignorance and want. And so I think that would be a really good quotation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that quote, and I also like that it's ignorance that's going to lead to doom.
Yes.
So even worse than poverty, not educating children.
Yes.
Because if you educate your poor children, they then have an opportunity for employment and they can lift themselves out of poverty. If you don't educate them, you're forcing them into poverty.
Yes, and also forcing them into crime.
Exactly.
Okay, how about the Ghost of Christmas Future, which we've basically touched on when we were talking about Scrooge.
Yeah.
But what points could be mentioned?
So, you don't have to write about anything, so this might sound a bit controversial to you.
Okay.
But I think the Ghost of Christmas Future is only there to give us this gothic element.
Okay.
He's the spookier one, the scarier one. I think in terms of Scrooge's journey, I don't think he makes any difference at all. For me, the Ghost of Christmas Present has already told Scrooge everything he needs to know, and the Ghost of Christmas Future is there for a little bit of extra thrill, a little bit of extra horror.
So how about the afterlife?
That was Marley at the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, he already knows that. Marley said, look, you're going to be like me, walking the earth forever.
In purgatory?
In purgatory, exactly.
Okay.
So I think the Ghost of Christmas Future is purely there for the thrill of the ghost story at Christmas.
Okay.
But in terms of Scrooge's journey, doesn't make any difference at all. That's my controversial theory.
Okay, well, I would differ a little bit. I think Ghost of Christmas Future, for sure, reinforces Marley's message, as Mr. Salles has mentioned, Also, of course, remember that when you're thinking about writing this response contextually, Dickens was very aware that all his readers, majority of them in the Victorian era, were very religious. And so the ghost is portrayed as this Grim Reaper type of figure to warn them of what's going to happen to them once they die as a result of their greed. So I feel like this ghost was used as a way to also trigger Dickens's readers into feeling fear and being inspired to change as a result of reflecting on how their actions not only will impact them in the present, right? People are more miserable. We can see Scrooge is even more miserable from being so miserly, but also in the afterlife. So I think the Ghost of Christmas Future, he still has a place in students' essays.
The memento mori figure. I can go with that.
Yes. Okay, so obviously if students don't get a character question, but they get a theme question, we think if you get a theme question, the theme that could come up is poverty/charity, charity being the other side of poverty, or redemption.
Yeah.
Right.
So last time we made a video together, I basically said whatever the question is, whatever the words are, it's basically redemption.
Okay.
Yeah, even if it's the ghosts, even if it's Scrooge, even if it's poverty, it's all about how does Scrooge's redemption show the thoughts about poverty, or show the impact of the ghosts, or show Scrooge's transformation. So for me, redemption and transformation, that is like fundamental. You're going to write about that, whatever the question.
Whatever the question.
And the quotes that we've used, they'll do the job.
Yes. So guys, now we're going to take a few questions before we finish up. And also, Mr. Salles, I don't know whether you have any announcements or anything you want students to be aware of that you're going to potentially be doing?
Well, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing. You can get all the quotes you want on my website, or probably on your website as well. So just take your pick. You want model essays, you can get them. I've done a prediction essay for every single text that's coming up. It could come up, it might not. You can visit my website or not, doesn't matter. Okay,
and also guys, I know you're all focusing on Literature Paper 1, but when Language Paper 1 eventually comes round, I will be doing a night before revision class. This is going to be on Wednesday. It's going to be a 3-hour revision class going over everything, a whole focus on questions 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, including both description and creative writing. It's going to be on the 20th at 5 to 8 p.m. So of course, for those of you guys who want to ace those Language Paper 1 exams the following day, just simply join in. I think I'll put the link in the description somewhere there. So guys, I'm going to now check the questions, and then we'll pick a few questions, and then obviously wrap this up because Mr. Salles has a play that he needs to be watching, right? Yeah. So guys, I'm going to quickly check the questions.
You check the questions.
And
so I will do a video for each of the language questions actually before the language exam.
Okay.
I ought to do that.
Yes,
I will do that.
Right, so guys, it's a little bit challenging to keep up with these questions.
People write too much, don't they? Just pick one at random.
Right, somebody asks, what about Kingship? Will Kingship come up?
Okay, I love this question.
Okay.
Kingship will not come up, but there's a chance.
Okay.
And Kingship is a really easy one to do.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Can I swap the laptops here?
Yeah.
I'll move the laptops around so that I can also see your what the
so I'll
are.
whittle on about Kingship.
Yes.
When you're writing about Kingship, you've got to think, what is going to make King James happiest? Because that's who Shakespeare's writing for. So, number one, he has to show that kings rule by divine right, which is why Macbeth has to be punished for killing a king. But what kind of king is best? This is why we have this ridiculous scene where Malcolm and Macduff meet, and Malcolm tests Macduff by saying what an awful king he's going to be. He's going to sleep with all the Thanes' daughters and wives. He's going to persecute the Thanes so that he can steal their land. These examples are put in by Shakespeare to tell the nobles, look, you might not like King James, but look at what he could be like. You are lucky to have him. And so this is like a bit of propaganda to try and say to the nobles, King James is the best king that you could have. It could be so much worse. Let's all unite behind him. King James, we love him.
Okay, there's another question that's come up a few times. Will guilt come up? Guilt.
So, guilt could actually come up.
Okay, I think guilt could come up dressed up potentially. If guilt comes up, actually, let's say
it does.
how is guilt presented?
Yeah.
I think guilt is still super broad as a question. Guilt, you want to tie it into ambition, and I actually think it would be a really nice tie-in for ambition and supernatural.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to guilt, remember guys that guilt is the consequence of ambition.
Yeah.
And in other words, the supernatural hallucinations, this is the floating dagger of Macbeth. This is when he sees Banquo's ghost, but also Lady Macbeth's spots of blood. All three supernatural hallucinations symbolize guilt. And I actually did a video on the theme of guilt, so of course you can also watch that if you want to see like a perfect response. But any essay on the theme of guilt must mention these three supernatural hallucinations, which demonstrate how ambition leads to guilt within Macbeth's character, but also Lady Macbeth. However, how the guilt manifests is very different. Macbeth manifests his guilt outwards. He starts killing, he starts murdering, he becomes a tyrant. Lady Macbeth, she turns her guilt inwards and can't live with herself, and of course ends up dying.
I'd go slightly further than that.
Okay.
I think at the end, Macbeth doesn't feel guilty at all.
Okay.
So that you can get to discuss that and
His lack of guilt.
Yeah, complete lack of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
He's not feeling anything anymore. In fact, he's even desperate to feel. He says, "I forgot the taste of fears." He's actually looking for something to feel. Remember in the sleepwalking scene, he's sleeping fine. Mm-hmm. Whereas at the beginning, it was like, "Oh, Macbeth does murder sleep." It's not his sleep that's been murdered, because he soon learns to sleep, and it's Lady Macbeth who doesn't. The guilt affects her, but I don't think it affects him in the end.
Okay, so I'm going to look at another question. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm going to start taking 2 questions. Do you think any other character can come up for Macbeth is one of the questions?
No.
And also,
Don't.
extract predictions. Oh, I'm not sure about extract
No,
predictions.
there's pointless doing that.
Okay, the chat is moving crazy fast. Okay, so guys, we're going to have to go a bit slower. How do we use context in our answers? Okay, so that was a good question.
That's a good question.
Yes, actually, that's a really good question. So somebody asked, how do we use context in our essays? Context is super important,
Yes.
firstly. I think context, lots of students don't understand that context, not only does it show, does it take off your AO3 marks, to talk about context shows that you're going straight into Shakespeare's message, talking about Shakespeare's influences at the time, and therefore not only are you actually going to be forced to talk about AO3, which you're getting those AO3 marks, but also it immediately forces your essay into a higher level of sophistication, because you have to talk about what things were happening at the time that affected Shakespeare at the time.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to talk about my approach to adding context.
Go for it.
And then perhaps you can mention your approach, right?
Yeah.
So guys, in terms of how to add context in your answers, so for those of you that have been following this channel long enough, you will know I like to suggest keeping your paragraphs fairly simple, right? So for me, I really love pure paragraph structures. Point, evidence, explain, link. By the way, it's 4 steps, but it's not 4 lines, right? So a lot of people are like, you're not going to pass with Peel. Peel's so terrible because it's just really short. You're going to fail. No, because when writing the Peel paragraph structure, you're not writing 4 lines. You're opening with the point, relating it to the question. In your evidence, you're adding quotations. Now, in your explanation, I've become very specific and very formulaic. There's a formula to it, right? And again, students who've joined in my literature classes and we've gone over model answers know that there's steps to it. I suggest your context goes in your explanation, but in this order. Firstly, after you add your quotations, first begin by mentioning techniques, right? So for example, let's say you decide to mention stars hide your fires, right? As a quotation that shows Macbeth's guilt at his ambition. You start off with talking about, in step number 1 in your explanation, technique, right? So there's personification. Then context goes in step number 2 in your explanation. This is where you mention how Macbeth feels a very strong sense of guilt and inner conflict because number 1, many Jacobeans mistrusted the witches because they were seen as agents of chaos. But also number 2, what Shakespeare was trying to convey to King James's audience is how ambition can be quite corrupting, before then adding audience effect, okay? And then finishing off with the link. So in terms of how to add context in your answers, I'm very formulaic. Again, guys, I literally always tell my students it is a formula. Make sure you structure your essays, and even within each paragraph, make sure you structure it in a way that's super easy for your examiners to understand. The context and how you add it in your essay, for my suggestion is mention technique first off, based on the quotation you selected, then add context, then mention audience effect.
Okay. I'll give you a formula just for some fun then.
Okay, go on.
So instead of Peel, I'm going to go with Peep.
Okay,
The
Pete.
difference is P at the end instead of L, And the P is the point of view, the author's purpose. Purpose and point of view. Because you started off by saying, when you write about context, you write about the author's point of view.
Yes.
And I'm going to flip that. When you write about the author's point of view, you automatically include context to back it up. So, instead of worrying about where my context is going to go, I'm just going to finish every paragraph with what the the author's purpose is, their point of view. And if I do that for every paragraph, automatically when I'm writing about the poet's point of view or the writer's point of view, it's going to include the context of the time. And so I know I'm going to hit context. And the other thing that makes me happy about this is the examiners don't want lots of writing about context at all. They're happy to accept the context of the play as context, as well as the context of the time. And so it is impossible not to include context if you're writing about the author's purpose.
Okay.
So that's why I've got P for the point of view or the purpose at the end.
Okay, and guys, for those of you that want to know which extracts are going to come up, I've just remembered, I literally did a video on Monday going over the 8 extracts that could come up in Macbeth. So for those of you that want to know, like, okay, what are the top extracts and literally to make sure I know, just watch that video, okay? Right, guys, let me see if there's any additional questions. How to link any theme to different moments in... How to link, okay, actually, sorry guys, the chat started moving really quickly.
People have gone too fast.
They are going too quickly. How do you write, okay, so 2 things. How do you write a strong thesis statement? And also, can you go over fate and free will very quickly?
Okay.
Thesis statement.
2 or 3 author's purposes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's as simple as that. So using the keywords of the question, what is the author trying to show? And those don't change. Whatever the question is, the author's purpose is always the same. So I can memorise those purposes and know I can adapt them to any question.
Okay.
But you have to link it to those keywords in the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would completely agree. I think thesis statement is basically you put that at the beginning of your essay and you basically talk about, in connection to the question's keywords, what intent was Shakespeare trying to convey. Let's say you're talking about Macbeth. Or obviously in Christmas Carol case, what intent was Dickens trying to convey. You can also sprinkle in a little bit of context, not too much, and also sprinkle in a few buzzwords. Again, guys, I'd gone over buzzwords last week, right? So obviously for those of you guys who had joined in my literature classes, keywords like how Macbeth is used as a cautionary character and so on, that goes into your thesis statement. But really, guys, in summary, thesis statement is simply what message is the author or the playwright trying to impart when you think about the question's keywords, and then maybe finishing off with just a quick summary of what your essay is going to go into. Now, somebody asked about fate and free will. Can we quickly go over the theme of fate and free will? Guys, I'll be honest, I didn't actually want to add fate and free will to this list. It was Mr. Salles, because I don't think you're going to get fate and free will. Okay. However, let's say you get fate and free will. I think this play is really powerful, especially when you think about the characters of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth in portraying 2 characters who try to go against their fate. The idea of fate and free will, right? Actually, this should be in free will, is this idea of going beyond and controlling the circumstances in which you were born and in which you find yourself in, and trying to take control of that. Remember that this play was written at a time where there was this idea of a very fixed hierarchy, right? There was this great chain of being where wherever you were born, you should be happy to stay there, and you lived and died in that position. And of course, the theme of fate and free will is used by Shakespeare to convey how Macbeth and Lady Macbeth try to exercise their free will in order to rise above their rank and take power and become king and queen. However, ultimately what the play is trying to convey is how fate always prevails.
So I'm going to take the ancient Greek tragedy. Okay. So tragedy comes from the Greeks. And in Greek tragedy, the hero is told their fate.
Yes.
And the thing the hero does is everything in their power to avoid that fate. And the irony is everything the hero does brings them closer to that fate. So you can't escape it. But Shakespeare's playing a different game.
Okay.
With Macbeth, he is told his fate, you're going to become king. It's not a terrible fate, it's great. He doesn't have to avoid it. He's just go, yes, brilliant, I'm going to become king. I'll just wait for that to happen. His mistake is that he uses his free will to accelerate that fate. He's not willing to wait. He decides to murder Duncan instead. And that is his tragedy, is that he uses his free will for evil purposes to make the fate come about. And this is a completely different form of irony, because in Greek tragedy, the gods use people for their sport, so they're like playthings. The gods care nothing for people. In a Christian society, God is there to look out for you. And God has chosen Macbeth to be the next king. But what does Macbeth do? He just takes God's gift and he ruins it by killing God's appointed king. And so he's punished for going against Christian society, going against the great chain of being, because he exercises his free will, not because of his fate.
Okay. Right, so guys, Mr. Salles, it's 15:15. How many more minutes
We
do
can
have?
go as long as you like.
Okay, so not too long, because somebody has to
Let's do
drive
5.
back to London.
Yes, a very slow and sensible speed.
Right, so
Let's
guys,
have a final question.
okay, some final questions, guys. Okay, so the chat started moving. This actually is specific to Christmas Carol, but I think this one is good to address for Macbeth, right?
Okay.
What if a different character comes up in Christmas Carol like Fred, i.e. different characters?
Yeah.
And also, what if a different character comes up? I'm going to mention why this is important.
Yeah.
And in Macbeth, would we get gender or masculinity? And also there was one which was, is there any top quotes or best quotes? Let me just see.
We've done those.
Yes, we have. We've talked
Yeah.
about
Pay
best
attention.
quotations, guys.
And hopefully our live you can re-watch.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's going to be rewatchable. So
Rewatch.
guys can rewatch the...
Do it on 2 times speed, or here is a top tip. Go to the script at the bottom and copy and paste that script into your favourite AI, and then ask it to summarise the important quotes for you, the important arguments, the different points of view, and these questions that you haven't answered now, you can get the AI to answer for you based on our script. Damn, we'll be out of a job soon.
Yes. Somebody's asking about URL links. Okay, so guys, I don't know if you guys are talking about the URL to sign up for the Night Before Language Paper 1 masterclass, which is, I'm going to be going over model answers for that. This is for Language Paper 1, so this is going to be the night before on the 20th. The link is literally in the description box, but also if the link isn't working, just go to firstratetutors.com. You're going to see a drop down button with GCSE classes, and then you're going to see Night Before, click on that, and then just literally sign up for that class.
Yeah.
It's going to be a 3-hour class, going over model answers, everything. Now, one of the questions I did want to address, because I'm just looking at the chat, is it was to do with Fred.
Yes.
But actually, I think this question is just more broadly.
So different character.
Different characters, right? So for example, sometimes students ask, and also this is even for Macbeth, what if King Duncan comes up? What if Malcolm comes up? What if Donald Bain comes up? What if Fred comes up? What if, I don't know, the person that was cleaning Joe's house at the back in Christmas Carol comes up?
Yeah.
What would we do then?
Yeah.
Guys, firstly, I think lots of students think that AQA, even Edexcel, because I know some of you guys are doing Edexcel, they are giving you these exam papers to catch you out. So they're gonna, give you like the most obscure character, right? The person who came up like once and then never showed up again, just to see whether just to catch you out.
Yeah.
Guys, remember, AQA, Edexcel, your exam board isn't literally trying to catch you out. They don't want a bunch of students failing these exams, okay? So guys, for Christmas Carol, you're not going to get a character like Fred. You're not even going to get a Belle character. You may get them appearing in an extract, right? So you may get a extract where you have Fred that appears when he's telling his uncle, Merry Christmas, he says bar humbug or something with Belle, for instance. But you're not going to then get the question asking you, talk about how Fred is shown, talk about how Belle is shown. Conversely, it's the same for Macbeth, right? You're not going to get like a question only to talk about King Duncan or only to talk about Macduff's character. You may well get an extract that has him featured or Macduff, right? However, if you get something like that, it's still going to ask you probably a more general question. It's probably going to be a theme question or something still relating back to the main characters, okay? So my belief is that your exam boards are not looking to catch you out. They're not going to ask you about some obscure character you've only read once and then you don't know what to write about on the spot. They still want you to pass. They just may potentially give you an extract, and if they do, which features this character, it's probably going to be something broader like a theme.
I agree completely. Yeah, they definitely don't want to catch you out because they want to keep schools using their exam board.
Yes.
This is a ka-ching business, and the people who write the easiest exams get the most money.
Yes.
And so they 100% aren't trying to catch you out.
Yeah, and obviously if everyone was caught out, they'd have to lower the grade boundaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the other thing. If you get a question with characters that you haven't revised properly, then probably everyone in the country will be in the same position. Well, they've still got to give out the same number of grade 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s and 5s, even if the standard of marks go down. And so it's the students who don't panic who are going to get the highest marks.
Yeah.
And so when you've got the extract, there's loads you can write about in the extract. And if you're not familiar with the characters in the extract, write about the rest of the play. And so just keep writing. If you keep coming back to the main characters that we've talked about, they're going to be relevant to whoever the character is. And the same, if you keep talking about the themes that we've talked about, they'll be relevant to whoever the character is. So as long as you bring it back to these themes and these characters, you're going to sail through.
Okay, time for one more.
Okay, final one.
One more, and
One
then that's
more.
it, guys. Okay, so appearance in reality, no.
No.
And is the question going to ask about specific quotes? What quotes are useful?
No.
Guys, we've talked about the quotations, and we talked about how many paragraphs. Right, so guys, actually, I think we've answered most questions from what I can see
That's
here.
a good feeling.
Yes, so because a lot of the do you think Macduff will Banquo and Macduff can be named in the question? Of course, as we've mentioned.
Yeah, that's the same question we just had, really.
Yes. Okay, so we've talked about time management. So any advice? Okay, so the chat started moving. Okay, so we're going to finish off with top 3 tips.
Top 3 tips.
Top 3 tips, right? So
Okay.
guys, we're going to finish off with top 3 tips, and then obviously you guys are going to have to love you and leave you. Top 3 tips: time management, exams, managing time between now and the exams in 48 hours. What would be the top 3 tips?
Okay, my top 3 tips are: go back to the quotes that you know are going to be useful to every single essay. We've given them to you here. You should have revised that in your notes. If you haven't, you can just write down 7 different questions, give them to an AI and ask which quotes would fit all of them. Do that. Number 2, just revise the quotes and the analysis. It's how you analyse the quote that's going to get you the mark. Number 3, remember this. You get marks for how much you write. If you look at every single essay, what you'll see is a grade 6 essay is longer than a grade 5, grade 7 is longer than grade 6, a grade 8 is longer than a grade 7, and so on. And so your number 1 skill in the exam is not to look up and see what everyone else is doing, not to look up and think. Writing is thinking. Damn well write as fast as you can. As long as the examiner can read it, you're going to get more marks. And the person sitting next to you who is thinking and not writing, they're going to get lower marks.
Okay, guys, my final top 3 tips between now and your Literature Paper 1 exams is: number 1, try to make sure you have gotten your strategic quotations memorized for the main characters, especially the characters that we have gone over today. Number 2, I would like to suggest, try if you can to look at well-written model responses. You already know that Mr. Salles and I have already got a bunch of model answers you can access on our website. So of course, on Mr. Salles' website, it's both the model answers
And my Substack.
and your
And my
Substack,
Substack.
right? And obviously for those of you guys that may have missed my literature classes, that's one thing I was going over this week. You need to revise from well-written model answers, selecting the quotations that work really well, looking at how analysis looks like and how it's weaved into model answers. So of course, you can just go on the website, First Rate Tutors, look at the literature page, and you're going to see lots of model answers that you can download there. And number 3, guys, after you've done that, just look at past questions and do very quick essay plans, okay? And number 4, kind of this is just something for the night before. Please don't stay up all night doing
Yes.
all-nighters
Yes.
and sleeping for like 2 hours because you're going to have the worst brain fog
Yeah.
in that example. You're going to feel loads of adrenaline like for the first 10 minutes and then you're going to start having loads of brain fog, okay? So also try it as much as you can, guys. To obviously put in the time, it's good that you've obviously tuned in because this is part of your revision, but then afterwards, obviously put in the time now and Sunday, but you do need to make sure, try as much as you can. I guess we sound a little bit old when we say this,
Yeah.
but try to get at least like 5 hours sleep, okay?
5?
Minimum.
Oh, come on. No. Sleep is
7
the
to 8
thing.
hours,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
so that you don't have brain fog.
Yeah.
Guys, don't do the all-nighter to yourself. Like, it's actually, all that revision is not going to be that useful if you have brain fog in the morning.
Exactly.
Okay?
Right.
Guys, so thank you so much for joining in. And of course, guys, don't forget that I am going to be having a night before language paper 1 class. This is going to be at 5 to 8 p.m. 3 hours, nothing but model answers, obviously answering any questions you have. This is going to be the 20th at 5 to 8 p.m. So obviously make sure you join in. This is after your literature paper 1 exams are over, of course, okay? So guys, I'm going to finish the live and obviously say goodbye to Mr. Salles. Oops. Thanks, guys.